My lords, today I'm going to discuss in detail the Ketlings and the Ratlings. These nasty but cute, fairly sweet little rat-like creatures are remarkably versatile, and we believe they've managed to survive an atrocity that would put the Manchurian police action of '88 to shame. They appear to have spread across the galaxy, as the Ratlings show up as traders or caravanners, trundling across the galaxy selling random junk to whoever will give them the time of day. The Ketlings, however, while they appear to be the same species, had a far worse origin story. I also believe that the two species warred at some point, either due to their differing opinion on how to ascend, but also perhaps due to a relic known as the Rubricator. It is unclear if the Ketlings and the Ratlings are the same species, but they do certainly look the same, and they share similar traits. Ideally, we need some tissue samples to know for sure, but I am confident enough to speculate that they are the same species. In any case, we first learn of the Ketlings after conducting routine surveillance of several tomb worlds in the Genkor system. Dr. Queek aboard the science vessel Deliverance reports. Dr. Queek and his crew reported the presence of a decaying space station and multiple tomb worlds within the Genkor system. Whatever interstellar nation once inhabited Genkor appears to have collapsed into ruin long ago. Several tomb worlds occupy this system, and we've designated one as Ruinous Core. It is a junkyard of a planet, covered in the irradiated, rusting remains of demolished buildings, infrastructure, and vehicles. No higher forms of life are recognizable or present on the planet. As per the Doctor's initial suspicion, Ruinous Core appears to be the fallen capital of a spacefaring society whose former colonies are now nothing but irradiated scrap heaps on inhospitable tomb worlds. From the data that the team has gathered, the downfall of this lost civilization was almost certainly the result of interstellar warfare, waged against some unknown external threat. It remains unclear whether the planet's owners were repelled by the invasion but succumbed to the post-war fallout, or if the invaders simply crushed the colonies and their inhabitants before moving on. As the extreme state of ruin on the planet precludes the extraction of data from any remaining electronics, and neither the capital nor its colonies possess any survivors, it seems that we may never know for certain. But it is worth mentioning that we have seen this before. This could have easily been an unbidden attack, for example. The Doctor and his team hope to gain more insight into this lost civilization by surveying similar planets in this and neighbouring systems. But just as the Deliverance was about to haul away, we pinged a faint life signature on the hitherto lifeless surface of Ruinous Core. What our surveyors initially considered as uninhabited is in fact home to a species of rat-like sapients. Dr. Queek dubbed these creatures as Ketlings, and it would appear that these creatures had been living hidden from our view in tunnels in the planet's enormous scrap piles. The complex composition and incredible density of these massive junk heaps must have hindered earlier penetration by our scanners. Whatever may have brought the Ketlings to the surface is unknown, though now we can observe them, we have noted that their technology is almost entirely based on repurposed junk. We wonder if the Ketlings were the last survivors of the lost interstellar civilization who made these ruins. Closer study may yield more information. Several weeks of detailed analysis came and went. Dr. Queek's investigation into the rat-like sapients on Ruinous Core produced some surprising results. The Ketlings are psionics. They are capable of sharing their thoughts via a telepathic network spanning millions of small minds, but they are not hive-minded. Although the Ketlings avoid interacting with us, we lack the evidence to suggest that they're capable of advanced spaceflight. It would be remiss to classify the Ketlings as mere primitives. In fact, some of their repurposed machinery possesses a technical sophistication approaching even our own. Moreover, the Ketlings are neither the descendants of the civilization that constructed these cities, nor the conquerors that destroyed them. Rather, we speculate that the Ketlings were once the pets of the spacefarers who first colonized these systems. After their master's downfall, the proto-Ketlings were one of the few species to survive centuries of nuclear fallout on these ruined planets. Constant exposure to radioactive elements led to faster mutations in the Ketlings' genetic code, and their nimble appendages relative to starting intelligence and the close proximity to a variety of decrepit tools all culminated in the rapid emergence of a technologically advanced culture. We continued to study the Ketlings from a remote cloaked observation station for several decades, until one day sensors reported a sudden burst of activity. The Ketlings had launched a fleet of FTL-capable warships, and our planet-side reconnaissance indicates the enormous junk heaps that made up their homes in fact concealed extensive mining networks, power plants, fungus farms, and subterranean research facilities. While alarming, their ships have thus far made no display of hostile intent, and it is quite possible the Ketlings are merely establishing defences along their borders. Nevertheless, it's clearly time to recognise these aliens as an empire in their own right. Disturbing indeed. The Ketlings are psionic, thrifty, deviant, fleeting, slow breeders, and repugnant. They operate as peaceful traders and are egalitarian pacifists, and finally materialistic. As I mentioned at the start of the report, the Ketlings, I believe, are closely related to the Ratlings, the very rat-like species that operate Racket industrial enterprise, and who appear, at least from description, to be related to that of the Rubricator and the purple Grand Void Dragon, designated Shard. I'm not entirely sure how, but I believe that we have witnessed some sort of convergent evolution. Perhaps the empire that once kept the primitive versions of the Ketlings as pets spread them throughout the galaxy while they were still primitive. We do know that they occupied at least several systems. It's very feasible. Regarding the Racket industrial enterprise, we suspect that the Ratlings evolved in a similar manner to the Ketlings, with one key difference. The Ratlings are not psionic, which I thought was quite odd. They are in fact cybernetic. The Ratlings have the following traits. They are also suited to living on tomb worlds. As stated, they are cybernetic rather than psionic. They are thrifty, they have excellent trading algorithms, and they are also deviant, fleeting, repugnant, and slow breeders. But back to how all this happened, and we're not quite sure, but the Ratlings do know of the Ketlings, and even go as far as confirming that they are indeed long-lost ancestors. The Ratlings stated, "Yes, we know of them, our once brethren, generations ago, long back. They did not approve that we were cleverer than they, better at collecting, finding, taking, greater. They sent us away, floating in the void. No matter, we are stronger now, without them." I wonder if this statement gives us some sort of clue as to why the Ratlings ended up as cybernetic instead of psionic. Perhaps this particular sect were keen on mechanical and biomechanical modification. The Ratlings that remained were perhaps more susceptible to superstition and spiritualism. Thus one group eventually became psionic, while the other ascended cybernetically. Of course, the cybernetic Ratlings may still have latent psionic capabilities in their genome, but due to the cybernetic modifications, they're simply unable to access it. The Ratlings are traders by nature, and they want to sell you all sorts of marvellous junk. This ranges from super clanker destroyers, mineral caches, waste management specialists, and cosmic weather models. Despite their rat-like appearance, they are remarkably charismatic, with some of the best opening lines in the galaxy. I'll read 3 for you now. Do you like alloys? Do you like metals and gases? Hard workers? Precious minerals? Yes, yes. We thought you might. Never should have trusted them. Never should have made that deal. Filthy blorg. Oh, humans, we greet you. Would you like to trade? The rust? What rust? Oh, that rust. Just scrape it off. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Good as new. Which brings me on to my final point. I think it was the Ratlings who, after being kicked out from the Ketling Empire, were the race of rat-like beings that we found in various states of dismemberment on the relic world where we found the Rubricator, and subsequently the Grand Dragon, designated Shard. But further to this, I think the Ratlings and the Ketlings made war over this Rubricator artifact. The ship logs, which we first identified references to the Rubricator, do not mention a Grand Dragon. They are in fact cursing other Ratling-type creatures. Furthermore, we found multiple military insignia on the relic world that contain the artifact. Either the Ratlings had separated into several factions and were infighting, or the Ketlings and Ratlings were fighting over the Rubricator. Dr. Pascal reports on a summary of how we found the Rubricator. We first picked up faint traces of weapon radiation indicative of a military spacecraft on an asteroid designated JQQ 1800. What we found on the asteroid was a badly damaged military vessel bearing elaborate alien insignia. The ship had suffered a heavy incendiary attack which had melted its hull, leaving no survivors aboard. At the time, this was most confusing, as no weapons known to us could produce temperatures high enough to cause such an effect. As such, we searched the ship's logs. An analysis of the ship's logs revealed that the crew met its demise when trying to retrieve an irreparable alien artifact called the Rubricator. It was stolen from their society by a pack of thieving rats, a curious choice of words as they themselves appear most rat-like in appearance. The ship's logs are mainly comprised of curses willing the rat robbers to the end of the universe and beyond. We managed to count upwards of 50 individual words for defecation, as well as a wide selection of places from which a star's light cannot escape. It was from these logs that we uncovered the last known location of the Rubricator, and so we made haste to investigate. What we found was toppled over buildings, crashed spaceships, lumps of melted junk, and trinkets burnt to a crisp, which indicated that the former inhabitants of the relic world that we found fled their homes in the middle of losing a battle against a superior foe. The presence of bodies bearing foreign military insignia suggested that there may have been infighting between the clans of rats native to several different homeworlds, but their evacuation efforts were impeded by their unwillingness to abandon their treasured trinkets, and it would appear that many of the Ratlings lost their lives scrambling to save completely mundane items. It was a mess. Despite the carnage, there did appear to be some sort of order to the rats' chaos. In a somewhat official-looking building towards the centre of town, there was a digital inventory of every single item, complete with its origin, gross misinterpretations of their intended use, as well as some incredibly unhelpful notes on where to find them. The Rubricator was listed, though it was described as a thingamajig maker with magical powers, and its place was to the right of the Empress's lilac ribbon, under her snout swabs, on the four-legged box with the funny face. I feel like this may take a while. We were, however, fortunate. At the very centre of the city, overlooking the main square, was a grand, ostentatiously decorated palace with a garish neon sign advertising it as the Empress's Motel. Inside there were lavish chambers filled to the brim with treasure, from which the Empress and her board of trusted advisors governed the planet. And it was also where the Hoarders held their last stand, defending the Empress and her precious Rubricator. After several days of searching, we eventually found a hidden chamber cluttered with artifacts, gnawed bones, and a substantial amount of fresh slobber. But under a used royal nose swab, on a four-legged table with a carving of a face that was indeed funny, sat the Rubricator, the maker of thingamajigs, right where it is supposed to be. It was a tiny, insignificant-looking cube which spewed out a continuous stream of artifacts. The Rubricator, as it turned out, was a replicator, an ingenious alien invention that can make endless copies of just about any artifact, and it was now ours. We began our journey back to the safety of the ship, not knowing, in truth, what had happened here. Dr. Pascal and his crew made it back to the science ship and disembarked the planet. Minutes later, however, they were chased by a snarling, hissing fiend from the void. This, it would seem, was the very adversary that had finished off these little ratlings. A grand dragon, who in a communication to us called itself Shard. Fortunately for Dr. Pascal, Strike Force Delta was only several hyperjumps away, and the science vessel managed to avoid being crushed by the dragon until the Strike Force arrived, and it did not take long for the Perdition beam aboard the Strike Force's flagship, a Titan-class war vessel, to make quick work of the creature. And thus the Rubricator was now ours. And that brings a close to all we know about the Ketlings and the Ratlings, a funny people full of secrets. If you want to learn about the galactic crisis known as the Pythorian Scourge, then please click the video on screen now.